Hello, my name is Cynthia Deathridge. Welcome to part 1 of the story of Jochebed, the mother of Moses, whose name in Hebrew would sound more like Jocheved. My goal in presenting her story and others like it is to lift the ink off the pages of the Bible, the Tanakh, and other historical references, to breathe life into those whose stories are told within these records. All too often when we read their stories, they remain in our minds just that, stories. Told at a distance, flannel graph figures on a flannel graph board, superheroes in tunics, and sometimes they seem unrelatable to those living in modern times. But through these retellings, I hope to help you understand that while these people lived long ago and their cultures varied from ours, they were real, living, feeling human beings who were no different than you or I. I hope to place you in their sandals as you walk their story with them, and maybe you might just believe that the God who worked in them is still looking to work in and through us today. As most of these will be recorded live, I apologize ahead of time for occasional verbal slips and mispronunciations of words and names. But regardless of such human error, I hope you enjoy part 1 of the story of Jochebed and check back for part 2 and more stories to come. Thanks.
The sun is hot, glaring down from a pale blue sky as if angry with Egypt, with its people, its cities, its monuments. It does not distinguish between master and slave, Egyptian or Hebrew. Even the Nile shimmers with reflected heat. The satchel I carry, filled with clothing for little Moshe, is growing heavy, and sweat runs down my body, making my brown woolen halug, my tunic, cling to my back. Shrugging, I try to loosen it to let my skin breathe, but the cloth remains stuck. I sigh and place one sandaled foot in front of the other, dust from the path making small yellow poofs each time I step. Moshe, toddling along beside me in his white linen tunic, does not seem to notice the heat. There is too much for his large brown eyes to see. The path we take runs by the river, and he watches the black and white ibis as they bob and dance along the water's edge. He listens to the papyrus reeds whisper as their long stems sway in the current, and his small, plump fingers hold tight to mine. I smile sadly and rub my thumb along the back of his smooth hand. It is the last walk we will take together, the last time I will know his touch. We follow the river, turning at a bend, and I spy a patch of bulrushes rustling in the water's flow. I catch my breath, memories flooding my mind, memories from 3 years ago. I can still hear Miriam's young voice crying out as she dashed into our small mud brick house. Ima! Miriam stumbled through the open doorway, her sandal catching on the doorframe and sending her slender 10-year-old body tumbling into mine. I dropped the pestle I was using to grind malachite chips into powder and reached out a hand to steady her. What is it, Miriam? Why do you run like a frightened gazelle through the streets? She breathed hard, wiping her dark curls from her sweating forehead. It is cousin Libni, Ima. He is coming our way and he does not look happy. I breathed in sharply and threw a quick look at Amram seated across the table where he mixed the ground malachite into a colored glaze for his pottery. Were you expecting your cousin? I asked. He shook his head, his brows furrowing. Libni considers himself much too important to visit our home. We both turned our gaze to the reed basket in the corner from which soft baby coos and burbles whispered through the room. A tiny fist, barely visible above the woven basket rim, clumsily batted at the empty air. I heard Miriam dart back to the door to peer around its rough wooden framework. He is near, she hissed, drawing her head back inside, eyes wide and fearful. I nodded, forcing myself to relax. If I showed fear, it would only increase Miriam's. You know what to do. Take your baby brother to the storage room above. Keep him quiet. Sing to him if he starts to fuss." Miriam nodded and dashed for the corner, scooping up the basket and its precious cargo and scurrying up to the back stairs. I glanced around for Aharon, spying his young form near the cooking area, his hands and mouth full of dried dates plucked from the serving bowl that now sat upside down on the dirt floor. "Aharon," I said, striding towards him, scooping up the container with one hand. "Please put the rest of the dates back into the bowl. I need them to feed your cousin Libni." He nodded and dumped the sticky fruit into the vessel I held out. He started to pull a half-chewed piece from his mouth, but I smiled and touched his hand. "You can keep that one." Brushing back his sandy brown locks, I leaned in close. "Remember, baby brother is our secret. We must not tell anyone about him, not even cousin Libni." Again Aharon nodded, but I wondered how well his 3-year-old mind could understand the need for such secrecy. "Good." I stood and patted his shoulder. "Now why don't you go play in the backyard and see how many pretty stones you can find? We will look at them together when your cousin leaves." "Yes, Ima." He trotted off to obey, his small form just passing through the thick curtain that covered our back entrance when Libni's footsteps crunched up to our front doorway. "Blessings upon your house and all within," Libni's loud voice boomed through our tiny home. Amram rose and went to the door. "Welcome, cousin," he said, and gave Libni a warm hug that ended with a pat on his shoulder. "Come inside, sit. What brings you to our humble home?" Libni cleared his throat, glancing down as he walked across our carefully swept dirt floor, lifting his white linen tunic and his red overcoat as he went. My gaze followed his, and I spied a rather forlorn date I had missed. Quietly, I shuffled to stand in front of it, hiding the offending fruit with my halug. The two men sat on the benches across from each other, Libni brushing my mortar and pestle to one side and dusting off his smooth, uncalloused hands. I turned and picked up a jug of water and cups from the back of the cooking area, muffling a sigh. The water was no longer cool, but it would have to suffice. Setting the crockery on the table along with the bowls of dates, I respectfully backed away, keeping my ears open to the conversation before me and for potential noises from above. Libni cleared his throat again and ran his long fingers through his gray-flecked brown beard. "I fear I have ill news, cousin," he began. I stiffened, trying to keep my breathing soft and steady. "Oh, and what might that be, Libni?" I admired the calmness of Amram's voice, while my own heart began to pick up its pace, thumping fearfully in my chest. Libni sighed. "It is known you have kept your infant son, Amram." He waved one hand in the air. "Everyone in our community knows. It is only a matter of time before our Egyptian neighbors will hear of it too." I closed my eyes, my hand reaching back to brace myself against the limestone counter, my breath growing sharper. "And what of it, cousin? Is it your son that will die? Is it you who will be sent to work in the mud pits and the stone quarries or face the lash of Pharaoh's taskmasters if we are caught?" I opened my eyes and watched as Amram leaned forward, his normally gentle brown eyes aflame with passion. I felt a small twinge of satisfaction as Libni drew back a little, but Amram's cousin continued. "You know Pharaoh's edict, Amram. It is no longer in the hands of our midwives to dispose of male infants. Any Egyptian who knows about the birth of a Hebrew male child is to report it to the local officials. Failing to do so would place them in as much danger as us Hebrews." He clasped his hands on the table. "When you lived in Goshen, in the countryside, you were able to keep a harem. There were not enough officials to keep track of Hebrew births. But here, in Pi Ramses, it is flouting Pharaoh's edict right under his nose. And it might not only be your family who suffers." I flinched and fixed my gaze on my husband, wondering how he would respond. Amram's jaw clenched. If the head midwives, Shipporah and Puah, can stand up to Pharaoh, why cannot we do the same? Libni snorted. What honor would Pharaoh gain from executing women? My own jaws clenched at his words, as did my hands. Honor indeed. He continued, If you speak of revolt, Amram, may I remind you that we possess no weapons, that we have no soldiers, and that while most of our people live in Goshen, others are scattered throughout the lower Nile and ripe for slaughter. May I remind you that the strength of our men is beaten from them in the mud pits and quarries of Pharaoh. May I remind you that our women and children would be the first Pharaoh's soldiers would strike. But most importantly, Libni's shoulders slumped. May I remind you that our people have no spirit to fight the army of the most powerful kingdom in the world. Amram sighed and leaned back, rubbing his temples. But cousin, to have us murder our own son. He shook his head, his face lined and weary. My heart wept for him and for our little one. Libni looked up at the ceiling and cocked his head. I listened too and blew softly through my lips. Miriam was singing. Our little one was growing restless. How long could she keep him was uncertain. There are, Amram's cousin spoke. He paused and cleared his throat, looking down at his linked fingers, and began again. There are some traders from Midian staying at the inn at the crossroads. For a small price, they will be willing to take care of the matter. Something inside me exploded, my fear turning to anger. My body tensed as I stepped forward. That matter you speak of is our son, Libni. How could you suggest such a thing? Libni flinched and looked at Amram. Do you allow your woman to speak thus to you? Amram's lips twitched and he shrugged. It is not me to whom she speaks thus, cousin. Emboldened by my husband's words, I stepped closer. Pharaoh's edict is evil, Libni. How can Adonai forgive us if we murder our own children? A muscle twitched in Libni's cheek. I agree that Pharaoh's edict is evil, wife of Amram. Many Egyptians feel the same. But Pharaoh has all the power to do what he wills, and we have only the sweat of our brows and the lash of the whip. And as for Adonai, where is he? Why has he not heard our cries? Why has he not delivered us? Either the God of our fathers has abandoned us, or perhaps he does not even exist. I sucked in my breast sharply. How can you say such things, Libni? It is blasphemy. Once again, my husband's cousin turned towards him. Do you allow your woman to speak thus with your guests? Amram cocked one eyebrow, glanced at me, and then addressed the man across from him. I hear your objection, Libni. You know I am a man of integrity, and if my wife speaks with lying lips, I will reprimand her appropriately. Libni nodded. It is well. He glanced in my direction. So, what will you do to reprimand this woman? Amram shrugged. I have yet to hear her speak with lying lips. Ah! Libni struck our wooden table with his palm. You fool! I am trying to spare you and your family and our entire Ada, and you waste my time arguing with a woman. I clenched my teeth and tried to swallow my anger so I would not dishonor my husband or our family. But I very much wanted to crack the jug of lukewarm water over the head of my husband's cousin. Amram reached out and gripped Libni's arm. I appreciate your consideration, Libni, but there is no but, Amram. Did you not hear what the Egyptians did to Rishan's family for the very thing that you are doing? Amram let go of Libni's arm and sat back, his face showing alarm. No, I have not. A cold wave of fear swallowed my anger, and I backed away, needing to cling to the limestone counter once more. Libni drew a deep breath. They took not only his infant son and slaughtered him before his eyes. They took his other sons, the ones before the edict, and did the same. Then they carried away his wife, 2 daughters, to become slaves in Pharaoh's household. Rishon himself spends his days working in the mud pits and his nights weeping for his lost family. He paused, his face twisted as if tasting something bitter. The village where Rishon lived also was punished, the men beaten, the women... He swallowed and looked away. My knees felt weak as my eyes met Amram's. His gaze, so strong and determined, now looked lost, uncertain. Libni rested one arm on the table and spoke quietly. It is not only the Egyptians you must fear, Amram. Others in our Edda fear the repercussions of your decision. He sighed. Only speak the word, my cousin, and I will meet with the traders for Midian. Silence hung in the room. My heart hammered in my chest, and tears sprang to my eyes. Above us, Miriam's song grew louder to muffle the cries of my little one's hunger. I felt my breast tingle with the urge to nurse him. I closed my eyes. Adonai! My voice could not speak, but my heart cried out to Elohim. Adonai, my son, will you not spare him as you spared Isaac for our father Abraham? Does he not have a purpose for you? We saw it in his face, his eyes, the moment he first looked at us. Do not let Libni's words stand. You who hear, Yishmael, hear my cry. Show me how to save my son. My tears burned themselves dry, and a fire stirred in my heart, rising in my throat and seared the silence of the room. I will do it. Both men looked at me, Amram's eyes wide, Libni's shocked. My husband's cousin spoke. Jochebed, I will not ask that of you. The fire flamed within me, bringing a fierce determination. Again, words burned in my throat as a vision formed in my mind. I blinked and raised my eyes to meet Libni's. I will do this, Libni. I will take our little son and place him in the Nile, but I will not sacrifice him for Pharaoh, or for you, or for even our Edda. I will give him to Elohim Adonai, and you will see, Libni, my husband's cousin, that the God of our fathers is real and has not abandoned us. Libni blinked and wetted his lips with his tongue. The death of one little boy will not change things for the Hebrew people, but it might spare a few. He inclined his head towards me. I raised my chin as more words came. That is for Adonai to decide. I took a deep breath. Give me 3 days to prepare. Libni stood and nodded. 3 days. He turned towards Amram, who sat still and silent. Perhaps, cousin, I have misjudged your wife. He bowed and strode out of the doorway. At last, Amram spoke. Jochebed? I met his gaze and felt a shiver course through me. The fire that had burned in my heart began to cool, leaving me weak-kneed and breathless, but no less determined to fulfill the vision I had seen. I will need tar and pitch, I said, and the bigger basket. He nodded, the light of understanding growing in his eyes. Miriam stopped singing as our little one's cries grew to shrill shrieks of angry hunger. I closed my eyes and sighed as across my chest my halug grew wet and warm with milk. But for now, I said, I must answer our son's cry. I blink as the sun reflects off the waters of the Nile. Reaching up, I touch my face, startled to feel the wet of tears. Moshe laughs as a large frog hops among the bulrushes. Jerking his hand free, he dashes towards it. I follow more slowly, my gaze fixed on the long stalks and sharp leaves of the water plants, as once again my memories, like the currents of the river, flow through my mind. I grunted as my sandal tripped on a protruding rock that poked its way through the pale soil to catch unwary travelers. I caught my balance, and shifted the heavy reed basket to my other arm. The day was hot, and sweat ran down my face, wetting my hair beneath its veil at the base of my neck and continuing its salty path down my chest and back. My arms ached, my back ached, but neither could compare to the ache in my heart. Finally, I turned aside from the path bordering the river and took refuge beneath a small grove of palm trees, letting their green shade cool me. I sat down, placing the basket beside me. Miriam plopped down next to me, her own face shiny with perspiration. "I can help, Emma," she said, her brown eyes concerned. "I can carry him for a while." She had insisted on accompanying me, and Amram insisted she did too, as he remained behind, throwing the clay on his pottery wheel and furiously shaping piece after piece, while Aharon played with scraps of wet clay on the floor near his seat. I smiled, tired and sad. "Perhaps you can carry him when we have rested." I sighed and leaned my head against the trunk of a palm supporting me. We still had some distance to travel before I reached the spot where I planned to... I stopped my thoughts as a pang of sorrow struck me. There would be time enough to grieve later. To grieve now would sap the strength I still needed. I closed my eyes and slowed my breathing, letting a shade-cooled breeze caress my face and my arms. "Adonai," I prayed, my lips moving soundlessly with my words. "Am I doing what is right? Did not your words burn in my heart? Surely it was your vision and not my own that showed me what to do." My breast shuddered beneath the unspoken prayer, and I felt Miriam lay her hand on my arm and scooch closer to me. How could I doubt what I knew was true? His fire had flowed in my veins, his vision, the basket, the bulrushes, the voice of a woman, a flash of gold, and the fine white linen of royalty. It had come from him. I swallowed against the dry of my throat, against the tightness that threatened tears. It was not Adonai I doubted. It was myself. Could I do what he showed me to do? The basket rustled beside me, and a small whimper pulled at my hearing and my heart. I raised the woven lid, reached in, and lifted out our little one, holding him close. His face nuzzled against the cloth of my halug, searching for nourishment. I loosened the tie at my throat and tugged down my tunic, covering us both with my veil as he fed. Miriam began to hum a lullaby, and I smiled, running my finger against his soft cheek. Then I sighed and swallowed, my joy dampened by the knowledge that the next time he would need to nurse, he would no longer be mine.